Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Shute, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and we are so pleased to partner with our friends in the UW-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication on tonight's event, celebrating the 2021 recipients of the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics. It's no secret that UW-Madison has a long history of producing graduates who demonstrate excellence in their work as journalists and truly live the Wisconsin idea. We have a special relationship not only with the award's namesake, Anthony Shadid, but with our two panelists tonight. And indeed, we're extremely proud of the two recipients whom you'll meet later. When he was at the height of his all too short career in 2005, the Wisconsin Alumni Association named Anthony Shadid their Distinguished Young Alumni Award winner. And we're so pleased that his name continues to live on to award other journalists. Our two panelists tonight are also extremely accomplished and good and special friends. David Maraniss, of course, Pulitzer Prize winning author, is a frequent and favorite speaker at our alumni events, always requested to speak about his newest book or some of his past ones. And he's also served as a valued advisor in our publications teams. And Lindsay Adario, photojournalist, is represented in our alumni park as an example of an outstanding young graduate, having received the Forward Under 40 Award in 2008. These are just a few of the outstanding graduates we have, not only from the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, but across all of UW-Madison. My special thanks to Dean Eric Wilcox of the College of Letters and Science for letting us be part of this program tonight. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the program moderator. Katie Culver is an associate professor and the James E. Burgess Chair of the Department of Journalism Ethics at UW-Madison. And she also directs the Center for Journalism Ethics. Most importantly to me, she is a triple threat badger, having received her BA, MA, and PhD from UW-Madison. But let me tell you just a little bit more about her professional accomplishments. She is an integrated scholar at UW-Madison, and I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit about what that is like. But her focus is how you draw together research, teaching, and service to influence other people and telling stories in a truthful and ethical way. The Center of Journalism Ethics has been an important vehicle for her work, and she certainly has had a lot to work with in the recent past. Her recent efforts having focused on ethics and immigration reporting, the impact of the Me Too movement on media, and how journalism can address partisanship and other social divisions. Katie is widely recognized for her curricular innovations, and I think she's going to tell you a little bit about that tonight too. So again, Katie, thank you so much for letting us be part of this very special celebration. And I am looking forward to relaxing and enjoying hearing from our speakers and award winners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that kind introduction, and I'm happy to report the rest of tonight is not about me. Hello and welcome to all of you. I am delighted to have you here for the celebration of the 2021 Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics. In times like these, a global pandemic, political polarization, and some distrust in news media, I think it is the perfect time for us to celebrate the very best in ethical journalism, and we will do that together tonight. First, I'd like to share a word about Anthony Shadid, who, as you all know, was one of the most influential international journalists of his time. Anthony was revered, and deservedly so. He brought humility and humanity to all that he did, and he also brought enduring integrity. And that's why we named this award for him, and why we call to mind his impact whenever we gather to celebrate this honor. Anthony's name is now attached to another effort in the Center for Journalism Ethics, the Shadid Curriculum. This curriculum is designed for journalism educators and students and builds off the work of all of our recent nominees and finalists and winners so that students can better understand the ethical decision-making behind their work and how deeply important ethics is to the practice of journalism. You can't have great journalism without having strong ethical reasoning. As always, we are so grateful to Anthony's family for their support and encouragement in these efforts. We're making up for a little bit of pandemic lost time tonight. This week, a year ago this week, we were supposed to be in New York City at the University Club celebrating our 2020 winners. The coronavirus had other plans for us last year, but we'd like to highlight them tonight. We're still remote from each other. I honestly have to say, last May, I wouldn't have believed that we'd still be remote from each other, but alas, here we are. I'm proud to introduce you to the 2020 winners: Lakedra Chavis, Jody S. Cohen, Jennifer Smith Richards, ProPublica, and the Chicago Tribune for the Quiet Rooms. Their careful work with vulnerable and traumatized children led these journalists to produce an outstanding documentation of the unlawful use of seclusion and restraint in Illinois public schools. Within 1 day of the first publication of their work, state officials imposed an emergency ban on seclusion. My colleague Lucas Graves, who chairs our Shadid Award judging committee, said, quote, "This series sparked widespread reforms while also earning praise from both school supervisors and the families of the children involved, a testament to how careful, thorough, and honest the reporters were as they worked on this story."
The Quiet Rooms investigation explored the use of seclusion and physical restraint in Illinois public schools. And we looked across the state to see how often these practices were used, particularly on students with disabilities, and tried to learn why and whether they were being used appropriately. We found that many times school staff were using seclusion and restraint as tools of punishment and discipline, and not because they were responding to an emergency with a student. For our team, it was an incredible honor to know that someone out there thought we had treated this very difficult subject, with humanity, and we had treated the people that we wrote about and that had experienced a significant amount of trauma at school with care and ethically. We worked very hard to understand and learn as much as we could about the experiences of the people we wrote about, and it was such an honor to be told that we had done a good job working with people who were vulnerable and had experienced really difficult things. We'd certainly like to thank, first and foremost, the families that invited us into their homes. We spent a lot of time in people's living rooms and getting to know their children and going through personal records of theirs. And people really told us, just from the depths of their heart, their stories and their struggles and their triumphs. And we will be forever grateful for them being so welcoming and open to discussing some really difficult things with 3 reporters. A lot of people put in a lot of time and work to make the stories themselves the best they could be, but also the presentation, which was really striking. And it was really an effort of 2 newsrooms coming together and working very collaboratively. So I'd like to thank everybody who had a hand in the project, and that was a lot of people. Awards are wonderful and recognition is wonderful, but I think that it's so much more meaningful when it confirms something that you don't necessarily learn in journalism school and that some newsrooms don't necessarily reinforce. And it's that idea that you can pursue really tough, really sophisticated investigative stories and do so with the utmost compassion and do so with care and respect for the people that you're writing about. I love that this award really rewards you for that kind of work.
Congratulations to the entire team, and we are indeed delighted to award you for that work. And now let's turn to our 2021 finalists for the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics.
Hello, I'm Eric Wilcox, Dean of the College of Letters and Science. It is my profound pleasure to pay tribute to the enduring power of journalism and the vital role it plays in our democracy. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we are honored to recognize outstanding ethical journalism and the integrity that these journalists brought to difficult decisions. Anthony Shadid brought honesty and integrity to bear on some of the most difficult conflicts of our time, illuminating subjects with humanity and grace. Carrying his excellence forward is important and rewarding. Jim Burgess, whose gift founded the Center for Journalism Ethics, said UW-Madison is the ideal place for this center because of the impact faculty and students can have on our world. I couldn't agree more. I am proud to be a part of a community that keeps care and ethics at the very heart of its practice and to celebrate these Shadid Award finalists. On Wisconsin.
Canary is a 7-part investigative podcast from the Washington Post. It starts with a story of sexual assault in the District of Columbia. And then at the end of the first episode, you kind of hear that the podcast is going to go in an unexpected direction. It concerns an additional allegation of sexual assault that kind of cracks the story wide open and takes us to Alabama to track down an allegation about a prominent member of the criminal justice system in DC. This material can be very difficult for a lot of people to listen to.
There was a lot of discussion about which scenes to keep, how to go about, unraveling certain pieces of information.
When I went to the judge who was featured in the podcast for comment, he resigned just 3 days later. Countless therapists have reached out to me saying that they've listened to it and found it to be very meaningful in accurately portraying the experience that a survivor of sexual assault goes through.
So the idea that we had going in is we knew that Arizona had one of the best reputations in the country for serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mainly because so many people in those situations live at home. And that's wonderful. That's a goal of society, is to get rid of institutions and put people into the community in homes or small settings. But what we learned when we started to pull it all apart is that it's not enough simply to live at home. You need the support, and your caregivers and family members need the support to make it happen. And that's not always taking place. But I really wanted to make sure with this project that we focused on the people with disabilities themselves. That often doesn't happen with disenfranchised communities and people with disabilities in general. So we really wanted to make sure that we focused the work on them. And then that moved into the idea of making the journalism not only about people with disabilities, but for them as well.
We collaboratively, Anchorage Daily News and ProPublica, spent a couple of years looking closely at sexual violence in Alaska.
It evolved to include 29 different profiles of Alaskans from all over the state. Ages ranged from 23 to 73. So we were able to achieve quite a diversity in many different ways. It included the profiles digitally in the online gallery that became Unheard, and they also printed every day for a month in the month of June in 2020. So folks were able to read their stories individually in their local paper. And then we also published a guide with resources for victims and survivors who had experienced assaults.
These are folks, some of whom have chosen to spend a lifetime being silent because that's what they had been told to do. And this gave them an opportunity to reclaim their voice and to claim their story in a way that felt comfortable to them. The fact that we gave them sort of the agency and control over how their story would be told and how their photograph would be used was an incredibly important aspect of this project.
We basically spent more than 2 years really delving into the palm oil industry and labor abuses. For the most part, we really didn't use names, we didn't use faces. So we made up for that really by talking to as many people as we could. And so we ended up interviewing more than 130 current and former workers.
What we were most surprised about was all the different types of abuses people were facing. And it went from slavery and debt bondage to sexual abuse in the fields, to child labor, children who had never been inside of schools, to women who weren't being paid or being paid very little and had no chance to advance to get kind of supervisor jobs or stable work. So it depending on the group of people, we found abuses of all kinds. And it wasn't at one plantation, it wasn't at one company, it wasn't in one country, it was pretty much industry-wide.
We want to do a project calling the Star to account for its treatment of Kansas City's Black community over most of the last century. The way it disenfranchised, disrespected, and rendered invisible this community through omission and commission in its journalism.
The mainstream newspaper in Kansas City, the Kansas City Star, and its sister paper, the Kansas City Times, had for over 100 years ignored or unfairly or inadequately covered the Black community. We missed their story. We gave a false narrative about who Black Kansas City really is. And as a result of that, white Kansas City had a false narrative of who Black Kansas City is. And that perpetuated a divide. It perpetuated racism in Kansas City.
This year's finalists are reporting about extremely important social issues. And what we've discovered through this selection process is that the larger the potential social impact of the story, the greater the risk, the higher the stakes in terms of journalism ethics. So when we look at our wise and courageous finalists, we see that their reporting is based not only on courage in facing social issue of great importance, but also in facing the ethical challenges of protecting the sources that follow along with those great social issues. Their courage is twofold.
Wise and courageous. When I think of Anthony Shadid, those are two words that come squarely to mind. Here in the Center for Journalism Ethics, we are so very proud to continue Anthony's legacy and to honor his memory through this award. Congratulations to all of our 2021 finalists. We are delighted to celebrate you. And thank you. Thank you for the critically important work that you do. And thank you for doing that work with integrity, wisdom, and courage. And now, our 2021 winners of the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics are Margie Mason and Robin McDowell of the Associated Press for their incredible investigation of abuses in the palm oil industry. Margie and Robin, congratulations, and let me turn the virtual microphone over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say we are so honored to have been selected as this year's recipients of the Anthony Shadid Award. Just watching these finalists and seeing all of the amazing work that was done in 2020 and the ethical dilemmas that so many reporters faced. It's just truly humbling to be with you here tonight. And also, I want to say that this award to us personally is very special. As longtime foreign correspondents ourselves, Robin and I were great admirers of Anthony Shadid and his work. I think he really embodied kind of who we wanted to be and the work that we wanted to do as foreign correspondents in being able to go into very difficult situations and under extremely difficult circumstances often, and finding these just beautiful jewels of humanity and telling people's stories. So thank you so much. I just want to, talk a little bit about the genesis of the project and the findings, and then I'll turn over to Robin and she can talk a little bit about the ethical decisions that we had to make throughout the reporting on this. I think when most people think of palm oil, if they know anything at all about it, they probably think about the environment, the destruction of rainforests, the killing of orangutans and other environmental, problems. But we really wanted to kind of look at labor and labor abuses. And in thinking about this project, we had been covering the Rohingya ethnic Muslims in Myanmar and their persecution, and they were fleeing, and many of them were winding up in Malaysia. And we knew that there was a shortage there of, workers on palm oil plantations. And so we initially wondered, are these Rohingya being sold onto these plantations? And so from there, we started looking, and we found that, yes, that was indeed the case, but there were a whole lot of other problems as well. We found workers from a number of countries that were coming in they were being tricked and trafficked and sometimes outright enslaved on plantations. Sometimes they were being held, at gunpoint and forced to work for, years at a time without getting paid. We also found kids were working. In some cases, kids had never seen the inside of a school. They didn't know how to read or write. There was one little girl in particular that we focused on, and she had been forced to drop out of the 4th grade to help her father meet these impossibly high daily quotas on an Indonesian plantation where she was born. And she told me about, not having gloves and being out in this, hot sauna-like conditions and pulling with her little hands the little fruitlets and getting stung by scorpions and not being able to sleep and being feverish from that. And when I asked her if she wanted to go back to school, she started to cry. And she told me that she very much wanted to go back. She missed it. She had been the top of her class in math, and that she dreamed of being a doctor someday. And then I went back to interview her again. And I'll add, we worked on this project for more than 2 years. So, it was a very labor-intensive effort. But when I went back to see her again, she'd kind of lost hope. And she told me that, she had really just given up the idea of ever going back to school, and that she probably would end up working on this plantation just like her mother for the rest of her life. And so from her, we were able to then trace the fruit that she was harvesting and follow that into the supply chain of the companies and bakeries that were making Girl Scout cookies here in the US. And we did that over and over again with a number of products, from some of the biggest companies in the world: Nestle, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, L'Oreal. And so our idea was we really wanted to kind of do something, because palm oil is so foreign, even though it's in roughly half the products on supermarket shelves. Most people here really don't know much about it. And so we really wanted to try to bring it home. And we tried to do that with the women's story as well. We found that women were also really enduring extremely harsh conditions. They were carrying such harsh, heavy loads that sometimes their wombs were collapsing and protruding from their bodies. They were spraying really toxic pesticides that had been banned in a lot of countries. One woman, when I pulled out my Clinique lipstick, and I told her, this lipstick in America costs $20. I mean, she was shocked, and then she became really upset and angry. And she had no idea that, the palm oil that she was harvesting was finding its way into these products that, we as women in the Western world are paying a premium for to, feel good about ourselves. And she said, do you know how long I have to work to make that much money. And do you know how much sweat and blood goes into the work that I do? So in addition, with the women, we found that they were being sexually harassed. We found, young girls who were being trafficked and forced to work as sex slaves on plantations. And we also found women and girls as young as 13 who were being taken to remote areas of the plantation and raped by their bosses. And sometimes this was happening repeatedly, and they would end up pregnant. And, there would usually be no recourse for them there. In terms of the impact for this story, we were able to, get the findings out, and then, the U.S. government, Customs and Border Protection, they ended up banning for the first time 2 palm oil companies, Malaysian palm oil companies that are 2 of the biggest in the world. And so now they're not allowed to ship palm oil to the U.S. And so I will turn it over to Robin, who can talk a little bit about the ethical dilemmas that we faced. Robin, you're muted.
Oh, good. I get to start over. This is a $65 billion industry. And one of the things that we found, if you are flying over the 2 countries, you will just see, as far as the eye can see, the tops of little trees. And the people who are working on these plantations are living under, very harsh conditions, sometimes in shacks, sometimes in just cargo containers in the heat and hard to reach. And I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of ethics was that it was really risky for them to speak out. Their plantations are guarded. There's very many ways to recognize, not just the location, but the license plate on a motorcycle or a particular hut. And we knew that in the past, when journalists had covered the palm oil industry, that they had retaliated. They'd arrested people, deported people. There's the biggest fear for people was, especially in Malaysia, that they would be arrested for not having papers and be thrown into detention, where there historically has been caning, forcing people to strip down. So there was a lot of fear, and for us as well. I mean, we did not want to put them in a position where anything they said could come back. And when you're talking to so many people, we talked to more than 130 people, it's hard to keep track of, to follow up on everybody you spoke to. So that's really one of the reasons this project took a long time, is because every person had to be interviewed. Margie did most of the on-the-ground reporting. It could take, you'd have to fly to the plantation, get in stay overnight, drive for hours on a motorbike or a taxi, or arrange to have people come off the plantations. So it's really just was a very painstaking and slow process in order to make sure that the workers there was not going to be any blowback for the workers. In the end, for the most part, the only people that we named or showed photographs of their faces were those that had already returned to their home countries and could speak freely. But other than that, we really had to, mask their identities or provide as much detail as we could without giving them away. I'll just give one example: is a woman who had been raped, and the man who raped her, there were very distinctive things that he did. He put a knife to her throat. He spit in her face. He threatened not to say anything. So, there's you have to decide which details to leave in and which ones you just have to throw away, because it might be just one detail too much.
Thank you so very much to both of you. Congratulations, and we'd love to see your wonderful plaques so we could get a little picture of you.
You can see a lot of the reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so very much, Robin and Margie. We are just thrilled to have you here, and so grateful for the important work that you have done. It's just absolutely remarkable. And now it's my honor to introduce two journalists who likely need no introduction. Lindsay Adario is a UW-Madison graduate, as Sarah Shute mentioned at the top of our show. She's also an award-winning photojournalist who works routinely for the New York Times, National Geographic, and Time magazine. Throughout her career, Lindsay has covered major conflicts and humanitarian crises, such as Afghanistan, Darfur, and Iraq. She has released 2 books, Of Love and War, and her New York Times bestselling memoir, It's What I Do. I highly recommend it. As a former MacArthur Fellow, Pulitzer Prize winner, and Emmy nominee, Lindsay was named one of the 5 most influential photographers of the past 25 years by American Photo magazine. She's received several international awards and was named one of the 20 women on Oprah Winfrey's Power List in 2010. Lindsay was a friend and colleague of Anthony's and was once held captive with him while working together on assignment in Libya. Lindsay is joining us tonight from Ethiopia, where it is after 1 in.m. She got called away on assignment and is doing us such a kindness in joining us what is this evening for us, and very much this morning where she is. So welcome, Lindsay. And interviewing Lindsay will be David Marinis, a New York Times bestselling author, a fellow of the Society of American Historians, a visiting distinguished professor at Vanderbilt University, and an honorary degree holder from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. David has been an editor and writer for the Washington Post for more than 40 years. He's earned the Pulitzer Prize there twice and was a finalist for the prize 3 additional times. He's also won the George Polk Award and the Robert F. Kennedy Book Prize. David, whose hometown is right here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am, is also a member of our School of Journalism and Mass Communication Board of Visitors. For those of you in the audience, please feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat function right in YouTube. I'll be monitoring those, and we'll have a chance to pose them in a Q&A after Lindsay and David are done with their conversation. So Lindsay, I can't tell you how happy I am to see your face on that screen and how grateful we are for all you've done, Herculean efforts to be here. So without further ado, David, let me turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Katie. I love your program, and it's really a delight to finally virtually meet Lindsay Adario. It's so generous of you, Lindsay, to get up in the middle of the night for this. But as someone who went to the same school as both you and Anthony, and who worked with Anthony at the Washington Post for many years and greatly admired him, I can't think of anyone to better represent him than you, and this award, and the Ethics of Journalism program, and the great award winners this year, who I think did a remarkable work on that palm oil story, and all of the finalists, including some of my colleagues at the Washington Post. So I know one of your books was called "This Is What I Do." It's what I do. And what you do is fearless, intense, sensitive to people, making the invisible visible, and putting in context the humanity of what you're doing. If you don't mind, I don't know if you feel okay about this, but could you start by just telling us why you're not in London and what you are doing in Ethiopia? What idea brought you there?
First of all, I want to congratulate the winners. It must be a real honor to receive this award. And so I've been watching the presentation, and congratulations. It's really great work you guys did. I am in Ethiopia I have a year-long climate change and women grant for National Geographic. I'm one of their explorers this year. And because of COVID, I haven't been able to travel. And I was sort of waiting until I was fully vaccinated. And I kept changing the countries involved it's a 5-country project. And so based on sort of various factors, I kept changing the countries and landed on Ethiopia. And it's pretty tricky to get a visa these days. And so the visa came through sort of at the last minute, but I didn't even know until 2 weeks into the visa validity. And then it turned out it was expiring today. So I had to rush in last week. And it is indeed the middle of the night. I slept for a few hours and set my alarm. So I'm not sure I'm even coherent because I'm going to go back to sleep and wake up in another 2 hours to start shooting at 4:30 in the morning. So I'm not sure how this is going to go.
No, you're doing great, Lindsay. So you woke up at 4:30 this morning or 5 or whatever?
I wake up when I'm shooting on these projects. I get up at 4:30 or 5 for the morning light.
Right. And what did you do today? What did you shoot today?
I actually watched a camel giving birth, which was unbelievable. It was a complete fluke, but I you know, this is a part of the world where you rarely see people running, you know, there's like very little urgency in a lot of these villages. And I was, I'm in a very drought affected area of Ethiopia. It's in Eastern Ethiopia. I'm in the Somali region. I'm very close to the border with Somaliland. And I went to this village that I heard the rains hadn't come. And of course, it took driving for like 2 hours to even get. There are no roads. So you're driving through, you know, fields. And so I got there and we met the elder, and then I saw this young man kind of running. And I said, "Where's he going? Grab him." And he said, "His camel is giving birth." And I was like, "Let's go." And it turned out the camel was really malnourished because of the drought. And it was an incredible scene. So yeah, it was great.
Well, that's the serendipity that comes with being there, isn't it? That's so wonderful.
Yeah, of course. It was great.
Well, you know, being a great photographer is so much more than being technically proficient. You know, it's such an important form of storytelling for humanity and also of investigating. What was it that drew you to photography as a young person?
You know, it was really, photography for me was really kind of an excuse to meet people and travel and to ask them a lot of questions and to be able to sort of say, "Can I come into your house?" or "Can I follow you around?" And I grew up in a family where I had not really been exposed to photojournalism. There was not sort of the New York Times in our house every day growing up. Now there is, but there wasn't when I was younger. And so I wasn't really familiar with photojournalism. And so initially it was just sort of photography and the ability to use the camera to kind of move around and meet people and tell stories. And then eventually I started becoming aware of pictures in the newspaper and stories in the newspaper. And for me, it was sort of the perfect way to be able to tell stories with a purpose and to, increasingly, I did tougher and tougher stories, and then started covering war and humanitarian issues and human rights abuses.
Yeah. One of my great old friends, Elizabeth Becker, just wrote a really important book, you know, "You Don't Belong Here," which is about the women, the pioneer women or pioneers who covered the wars in Vietnam and Cambodia, including the great writer Frances Fitzgerald and the French photographer Catherine Leroy. And they really paved the way for everyone that followed in some sense, including you. I'm wondering whether as you were coming up, you had some women that you wanted to emulate yourself after, first of all. And secondly, after that, how you would compare what they went through with what a woman like you is going through today as a photographer.
Well, it's interesting. I was actually on a panel last week with Elizabeth Becker, and we were talking about Catherine Leroy and how she was sort of erased from history. I mean, she was not recognized at all for the work that she had done, and she was the only journalist, not even photojournalist, but the only journalist, male or female, to actually parachute into Vietnam with the troops. And so she was pretty extraordinary, and I think it's incredible she's not a household name. But I think, you know, for me, there weren't that many women to sort of emulate or to sort of follow. So when I was when I realized I wanted to be a photojournalist, I would go into, there was a bookstore in New York in Soho called A Photographer's Place. And I used to literally just go in there for hours and just look through the photo books and figure out, like, could I ever do this? Would I ever be able to do this? You know, and there were very few women. I mean, there was Susan Meiselas, you know, Gerda Taro, but not really, like, most of them were men. They were Robert Capa, Jim Noctaway, Gil Perez, Joseph Kudelka, Sebastian Salgado. So a lot of men. And so, you know, for me, it was just about figuring out, just trying to learn from their style and their access and how they were shooting. And then I started picking up sort of, there were other people that I admired their work who did not cover war, who were, you know, for me, it was really, they sort of taught me a lot about humanity and dignity and photographing with respect. And, you know, these are things that I'm still learning. You know, I think that the importance of this job is to continue learning and to continue sort of being open to, you know, not necessarily changing the way I do things, but just always sort of learning about people along the way.
And the second part of that question was about how you think what they had to face in terms of the sexism of both the people they were dealing with and the other journalists, how that has changed and how you've had to deal with that over the years, if at all.
I think it's more subtle now, but I think it still exists. I think that there is, you know, especially, it depends what type of journalism you're doing. I think in the world of war journalism, it's still very much a male world, and it's still people, including editors, bring their biases to who they assign. And I think, you know, when I look around me in a war zone, I'm often the only woman still, or there's like maybe one or two other women. And that's pretty heartbreaking that we're in 2021 and there still are not that many women. There have been, you know, in the last 20 years, there have always been a lot of women writers, but there aren't that many women photographers, because I think it requires, you know, photojournalism requires us to be right there on the front line. There is no way to take a picture, you know, unless we are right there. And so it also requires a you know, sort of great physical, you know, you have to be in great shape and you have to be able to carry a lot of gear and walk for long hours. I mean, I'm working in Ethiopia during Ramadan, so you know, I'm basically not eating all day because no one around me is eating. And so these are long days, you know, these are 15-hour shoot days. And I'm
so
like,
you're not just tired, you're hungry.
Oh, I mean, I'm like, so I get in bed at like 7:30, you know, as soon as the sun goes down, I go to sleep.
Wow.
So I think, you know, I think it's still a problem. I think it's still, you know, and then you add the element if one chooses to have a family. I mean, you know, there is a reason I didn't tell anyone I was pregnant until I was 6 months pregnant, because I was terrified I would stop getting assigned, you know, and I think that's a reality, you know.
Yeah. Since this is journalism and ethics, let's talk a little bit about ethics. I've read several of your other interviews, and you talked about sort of your relationship with your subjects and how that has evolved over the years and the care that you put into that now. Talk about that a little bit.
You know, I think there's like when I was younger, I was so driven by ambition and by this drive and love for this work, and to tell, you know, I have to do this and I have to, you know, I think there was and also being from the United States, where we have compared to other countries, women have more rights. And so I was naive sometimes and how I went into things. And I think now, as I get older, I'm much more cautious about, you know, making sure people understand how the photo will get used, that it will be seen all around the world, because there's Facebook now, there's internet, there's social media, there are things that didn't exist when I started shooting 21 years ago. And so I think, it's really important for me to go into every shoot knowing that whatever picture I take might be seen by a very wide audience. That I never thought of that when I was, first starting out, because I was lucky if one person saw my photos. I mean, I struggled for many years trying to be a photographer. I mean, I went into Afghanistan under the Taliban 3 times. I was one of very few photographers, and I couldn't give those pictures away. I mean, it was like, because it was before September 11th, and so no one really cared. And so it wasn't until after September 11th that people, started to want to see these things. So, yeah, I think it's really important to me. It's sort of paramount to make sure that people I'm photographing understand the use and also are okay with sharing whatever they share, if they've been sexually assaulted or if they've, whatever they're sharing with me, they are sharing with the world. And it's important that they know that, but it's also important, my approach to not go in sort of like a bull in a china shop with my camera blazing, and to really go in and introduce myself. I mean, these are people, it doesn't matter where you are, what's happening. It's important to sort of stop and be respectful.
Well, I've dealt with some wonderful reporters at the Washington Post for 40 years, and I've always found that the photographers are much more capable of putting people at ease than the reporters are, and they're also oftentimes better reporters than the reporters. So I greatly appreciate that, the way that that a good photographer can do that, and it's so important. As Katie said, you've been kidnapped, you've been ambushed, you've been in a lot of very tense situations. How do you deal with fear? And how do you deal with what is probably some post-traumatic stress after certain events?
I think people always say to me, "Oh, you're fearless." And I think that there could be nothing further from the truth. I think I get very scared in these situations. And it's really a matter of how do I deal with it. And for me, I go into sort of a very Zen kind of controlled state where I try to talk myself through a situation, like understand if my PTSD, the trauma that I have from years of doing this and all the things that I've survived, is kind of making me think a situation is worse than it is, or what, I have to kind of walk through everything in front of me, for example, with the kidnapping. In Libya, when I was with Anthony and Tyler and Steve Farrell, it was really, we saw the troops on the horizon. We were on a front line, and we were on a front line for too long. I mean, we knew that we were kind of pushing the boundaries of how long we stayed. And I think by the time we started driving out and I saw these little what looked like little toy figurines on the horizon in all of army suits, I said to everyone in the car, "Those are Gaddafi's troops." And everyone kind of laughed at me, and they were like, there's no way, they're in front of us. They're behind us. And I said, "That's them. They're the first guys we've seen in proper uniforms." And as we got closer, there was sheer panic. I mean, everyone in the car was just screaming something different, keep driving, stop the car, go faster. Everyone was. And for me, it was really kind of just, the world just stops, and I kind of watch everything and realize that in those kinds of moments, you as a journalist are pretty powerless. I mean, the only thing that you can do is stay calm and really sort of try to not panic and try to do what you're told. And I think that the fear becomes, I kind of use that fear to channel me to stay calm and to try to figure out how to stay alive. I mean, essentially, it's just about staying alive.
How did you stay alive?
I mean, I think we were really lucky. I mean, Anthony was very funny. He wrote me after, it was a long week together, in prison, on the front line, tied up, beaten up. And, I mean, we were threatened with execution. When we were blindfolded, we could hear each other getting beaten or touched. And it was pretty rough, I mean, over the course of a week. And I think the fact that we were together helped more than anything, because there was sort of we found kind of solace and a support and and kind of empowerment in each other. You know, when one of us would get really negative and really down, like there's no way we're going to live, the other ones would talk us through it. And I think that was key. And Anthony really kind of acted as our translator, though he had to pretend like he didn't really speak Arabic because we didn't want to be seen as spies. So he kind of played down his Arabic a lot. But
they couldn't tell?
I mean, we kept getting handed over to different groups, you know. I mean, the first groups, the first thing they asked for in Arabic were our passports, and we all knew the word in Arabic because we've all been working in the Middle East a long time. So we immediately handed over our passports, and then they were like, "Why do you know what we're saying? You're all spies." And we were like, "No, we actually just have been working in the Middle East a long time." And so at that point, they thought Anthony was a spy because he was speaking to them in Arabic. And then he realized that and dialed it back for sort of the next group and the next group. But he was kind of the point person that they kept taking to try to communicate for us. But he would just kind of play down how much he knew, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it really helped to just be together and to try to have, as ridiculous as it sounds, a bit of humor, you know, when we were in captivity. At some point we were brought to this kind of apartment with bars on the window, and they said, you know, if you open the window, we'll shoot you, or if you open the curtains, we'll shoot you. So we were kind of stuck in this like really weird VIP prison, and they kept bringing us like so much food, like, you know, food and like these like
why?
I mean, well, initially when they were like, "Do you want anything?" we were all like, "No, nothing. We just want a toothbrush," because we thought if we don't ask for anything, we'll get released. But of course, they showed up that afternoon with literally like 25 grocery bags, and we all just looked at each other and we were like, "We're never leaving," you know. And so it was just a matter of like, you know, trying to have humor and trying to like sit together and check in with one another and make sure we were okay.
And how did they treat you as a woman compared to the three men?
I mean, the first sort of 4 days of captivity, when the men were getting sort of hit over the heads with guns and really beaten, I was punched in the face, but I was more groped than I was, you know, I was sort of touched over my jeans and touched by basically every man that came across us. But I was never separated. There was one night when we were eventually put in a prison cell in Sirte, in Gaddafi's sort of stronghold, we all finally fell asleep because it was the first time that we were just sort of in a confined space alone, the four of us. We were scared to talk very much because we assumed that we were being listened to, but we kind of all just fell asleep. And at some point in the middle of the night, we heard like keys jangling, or I did, everyone else was asleep. And a guy opened the door and grabbed my foot and started pulling me out of the cell. And I just like bear hugged Anthony, who was right next to me, and was just like, I was just pretended like he was my husband, basically, and was just like, I'm not letting go for dear life because the guy wanted to drag me out. And Anthony was like snoring away. And I was like, just wake up.
Oh man!
But I mean, the guy.
But it worked. It saved you.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. The guy literally didn't even like. I guess he was just like, "All right, it's not worth the effort." But yeah, he just shut the door and locked us back in, and I was like, "Great." Yeah.
And how did that experience change you or affect the way you worked after that, if it did at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, every near-death experience changes you. I think you know, we're human, and I think, you know, a lot of what I realized, which is strange to me as a photographer who's lived in such close proximity with death for so long, is that most people really fear death and really don't even think about it, or if they think about it, it's something they can't get their head around. But for me, it's like such a constant because I'm either photographing people who have just survived something horrific, or I'm in an experience where I'm sort of making calculations of, you know, will I come back, you know? And so I think for me, it's changed me because I realize not only the risks we take affect us, but also our families. And I think that's kind of the biggest realization that we all had in prison, and we all had in captivity, was that, you know, we really, it is as much as selfless as it is a selfish profession, because we put, we do affect the lives of our loved ones and really put them through a lot. And so, yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest realizations. And then the people who work with us, our driver died that day. We don't know if he was executed or killed in crossfire, but he was a kid, he was like probably 21, I think. And, so I think it's also important to realize kind of how much responsibility we have for the people we're working with.
Aside from that horrible incident, tell us about Anthony. You knew him well. You worked with him. Tell us some Anthony stories.
I mean, he just, the passion that he put into his work and into journalism was sort of insatiable. We always talked about stories, and we had that same kind of drive to just be there and be at the front and be, telling these stories, but also finding those little sort of gems, those little stories within the context of chaos. It was just always looking to find a way to slow down that scene for the reader. And I think that was the beauty of Anthony. He really brought humanity to everything he did. And he really was articulate and sensitive and funny, and, with a little glimmer in his eye. And he was always kind of like, a little mischievous. And and I think even in Libya, I mean, there were, there was like one of the final moments before we were kidnapped. We were up at the front line back. We kept going back and then back to the hospital. And he stopped to have tea with these, with these guys, with a group of locals. Literally, a sniper fire is whizzing past our heads. Anthony was laughing and drinking tea with these, I think, truck drivers. And, I think he just always kind of loved being in the moment and really being with the people he was with.
Where were you when he died? And how did
I was
you know
in
about
bed.
that?
I had just given birth. I know. I had just given birth about
Wow.
5
Life
weeks
and death.
before. What?
Life and death right there.
Yeah, I know. That's the story, Matt. Well, I basically got pregnant when Tim Hetherington and Chris Hondros were killed in Libya.
Oh.
That day, I just said, forget it. I'm just going to do it, because I was 37. My husband really wanted a family. I kept saying, no, my work. And I finally just said, okay, forget it. There's so much death. Let's just go for it. And I got pregnant. And then right after I gave birth, I woke up to nurse, and I looked at my phone, and there were 100 emails from my editor, David First, saying call. And then I think he couldn't reach me, or I don't remember if I called him back or if he put it in an email. I probably called him back, knowing him. And he just said Anthony died in Syria. And I remember I was in such shock, and I was so, my heart just stopped, and I was nursing, and I remember I looked down at my son, and I just thought, and then I thought, this little guy saved my life, because I probably would be in Syria, and then I thought all these things why did he have to go? And then of course I knew the answer, we all go.
That's why you went. Yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you ask these really dumb questions, or you ask these questions that people ask me all the time, that of course I'm going to ask someone else, which is kind of ridiculous. Yeah. But anyway, it was really heartbreaking. And then I had to go to the funeral, and I had to figure out, I had no idea what I was doing as a mother. I had no idea, I had no experience with babies. I was not, a woman who had babysat as a young woman. I knew nothing about it. So I had to literally figure out how to get to Lebanon with a 5-week-old. So I got on the plane, and all these Lebanese women were I had to go to the bathroom, and they were here, give me your baby. I was passing my baby around to all these Lebanese women. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that worked.
Yeah, it worked. Yeah.
So you said that you went to Afghanistan the first time before 9/11 and before anybody cared about what you were doing, and you've gone back. How was shooting Lebanon changed over those 20 years or so that you've been doing that?
Afghanistan?
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Lebanon,
I'm
yeah.
Afghanistan. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I saw yesterday school was bombed, girls killed. I mean, there have been so many advances for women in Afghanistan. You know, there are women in parliament, women working, you know, really in the workforce, educated. There are all these great things, but the violence prevails, you know, the violence continues. And, you know, we don't know, obviously, what will happen after troops pull out on September 11th. I think it's such a hard decision because, I mean, how long can we stay there? But at the same time, I mean, Afghanistan is a country I love deeply, and the people I have grown really to love over years. In fact, I fell in love with them my first trip, their humor and the way, you know, they are. And I think, but can we stay forever? I mean, I think it's a very difficult question. I don't know. No one really knows what will happen. Obviously, the fear is that the Taliban will sort of regain a lot of the territory that they had lost, but in fact, they're still in control of a huge part of the country. You know, outside of the cities, the Taliban has a lot of land, and they really control a lot. So I don't know what will happen, and it's sort of heartbreaking to think about and heartbreaking to watch. You know, these deaths. I mean, I can't believe what happened yesterday. You just think of all those young women who died, and men, but I think women who died, and they had futures ahead of them.
Had you been there to that school or that part of?
I don't know if I've been to that school. I mean, I've been working there so long. I've been to pretty much everywhere in that country. So, you know, I mean, if I haven't been to that, I've been to a similar one. So, yeah, I mean, it's everything that happens there. I feel sort of viscerally because it you know, it's a place I've watched sort of grow, and then, you know, there have been steps backward, but yeah.
This might be an unfair question and maybe a naive one too, but you know, all photographers and reporters want to think they're making a difference. And you know, in this modern culture with all the social media and everything, I'm wondering how that has changed even our perspectives on whether we're making a difference or not, and whether you think about that when you're shooting pictures, or whether you think your work has
yeah,
had more
I
effect or
always
less.
hope. I always hope I'm making a difference, right?
Sure.
I mean, yeah, or else I wouldn't risk my life, right? I think if you know, I'm certainly not doing this for the money. I'm not doing this for the glamour. I mean, I'm in a hotel room where I
How
can't
could you
get
be more
wireless.
glamorous than what you are right now?
mean, well, yeah, it's. If you guys could see me during the day, it's anything but glamorous. And even now, I mean, you know, so look, I don't know. Make a difference. I think I can only hope that the work makes a difference. I think if nothing else, I can educate people. If nothing else, I do, you know, I get emails from young men and women around the world saying, you know, thank you, you taught me this, I saw this and I learned this, and you changed my perspective, and maybe that's enough, you know. But I do think that, I hope that the tougher work that I do does affect policy. I do hope it gives some insight into situations that people don't have access to. You know, sometimes we journalists can't get access to situations very easily, you know, so I think it's all kind of, I think if I can get myself there, I hope that the work makes a difference.
Yeah. When you go on assignment, you might sort of have a concept of what you're trying to get, but so much of it is like the camel giving birth, serendipitous, right? But even if you have an idea or you don't, you know when you found what you want. What is it that you're looking for in a great photograph?
You know, it's a combination of light, composition, information, you know, people being themselves. I'm looking for like reality. I'm looking for something that translates on in the single image what it looks like to me in reality. So that is hard to do because people are very aware of a camera, and they're very aware, they often kind of become very stiff or become very conscious of and change their actions. And so I think what I'm looking for is to be able to let people be more relaxed enough to kind of loosen up.
Yeah.
And to document what life really looks like in these remote places.
That leads to my last question, which is, in the last several years, we've been bombarded with fake news and what is truth, and is there any truth? What role does a photographer play in that sort of search for the truth?
I think it falls on us more than ever to make sure that we're doing our jobs with integrity and that we're being good reporters. We're getting the facts right. We are, getting all of our information right, because journalism is being challenged, over and over. The fake news narrative, which drives me crazy because it's like I risk my life to actually get real news, not fake news.
Exactly.
If I wanted to get fake news, I'd stay at home with my family and not be away for a month. So I think it's more important than ever to just make sure we get it right. And that we keep doing this work and that we keep telling the stories like the winners this year and like all the stories. We all play a part in sort of collective journalism. And so it's important to keep doing that.
Well, Lindsay, you've been terrific, but you can't go to sleep quite yet because Katie's going to come back on pretty closely, but some questions from people who are watching us.
Okay.
Yes, Lindsay, just to hang on a little bit longer with us, just a little bit longer for the shoot. So we have a question from the audience asking, do you have a favorite memory with Anthony Shadid? You gave us the harrowing kidnapping, but what's a favorite memory of your time working with him?
A favorite memory. I don't know. It's a tough one. God, everything was so overshadowed by the kidnapping, really. I mean, we had some great meals in Lebanon, and really, I remember those great sort of just having some really fun meals in Beirut and just, hanging out and talking. And yeah, I mean, in Iraq and Baghdad, going over to the Washington Post house and having these great dinners in the middle of the war, in Baghdad. It was always, for us, just sort of those friendships and those dinners and those sort of moments really kind of bound us. And so that's where I first met Anthony. And I know that Iraq was a place where he did stunning work. And just to go over and have those dinners and to have that friendship was really great. So, yeah.
I'm guessing if Anthony was there, Wilco was probably playing on the CD player for those meals. Quite a passion for him. We have a question from Nick. What makes a reporter-photographer relationship work the best? What tips do you have for reporters to get out of the way and prepare sources to help produce compelling photographic content?
I mean, there's kind of nothing better than a good photographer-writer combination. I've had a few people that I've worked with throughout my career that when it clicks, it just is amazing because you help each other. I think, photographers are reporters. And, I think that we love reporters who work with, we work as a team. So rather, there are some reporters who just kind of say like my photographer and just kind of push us out of the way and say, this is my story, go shoot it, essentially. And then there's like the reporter that you love to work with who's like, you go back and forth, you talk about the story. If I see something, I'll go and say, hey, this guy said this, or this guy, this is really interesting over here. And instead of saying like, this is my story, they go over and you go back and forth and they share what they're hearing, which makes me a better photographer because I can then go out and figure out how to shoot it. And, I like to sit in on a lot of the interviews because it helps me understand the story. And it helps me learn how to shoot. So I think it's a two-way street, really. I think it's really just treating each other as equals rather than sort of a photographer as like an appendage of a writer.
I agree completely. And having a good photographer with you as your teammate and colleague is essential to doing great work.
I mean, I remember Tim Weiner when he was at the New York Times and I was working with him in Mexico City. One of our first assignments, we were in Mexico, and he's like, okay, so I know you need good light in the morning, so we're going to get up really early. You go do all the great light. And then I've scheduled all my interviews in the middle of the day when you can't shoot anyway. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. It's like, who are you? You even know about the light? Yeah.
That's a fantastic example. I'd like to return to the topic of trauma and journalism, which clearly is something that you've dealt with individually and in small groups. But how should newsrooms address the cost to reporters covering violence? What ethical obligations do institutions have?
At first, I think they should recognize it. I think the trend is to just kind of pretend it doesn't exist and say, well, this person still wants to cover war, so we're just going to keep sending them. And I think that's a problem because, the problem with trauma is that it's not visible always. And so, it's not a physical trauma, it's a psychological trauma. So I think you need people. You need editors who are intuitive and who listen and who are not thinking so much about prizes as they are about, how that person is doing emotionally. I think sort of often the people who are the best photographers and writers are the people who push themselves to the point of experiencing trauma. And so it's easy for a publication to be like, oh, well, this is the person who's going to get us another Pulitzer. Let's just send them deep into wherever. But actually, you need to sort of do a check on how that person's doing. And, often that doesn't happen. So I don't know how, I've never actually had a staff job anywhere. So I don't know what it looks like in a newsroom, those conversations. But I think they have to be had. I think they have to be addressed. I think, sometimes I know that me and other colleagues have stepped in when we've recognized serious PTSD in friends and colleagues. And the news was not always well received. So I think there has to be, people have to be open to recognizing it to begin with. And there are great places like the Dart Center for Trauma. There are great, I remember after my car accident in Pakistan, the New York Times suggested I see someone, and I went to someone that they had recommended in New York, and it was like an Upper East Side therapist. And I just thought, oh my God, this woman knows nothing about war, nothing about like what, and I couldn't relate. And so I think it's also important to make sure there's a network, of people who understand the background.
David, as an editor in the Post newsroom, do you have any sense that we've made any progress in this regard? That news executives are more aware of needing to support, or is there still just a long, long way to go?
No, I think there has been a lot of progress. I think that all the editors that I've worked with over the last 20 years have been very sensitive to that issue, both in terms of the danger that they're putting the photographers and reporters in, and dealing with them once they come back. But I think you cannot avoid the trauma. When it comes, you have to deal with it directly. You can't, and you can't avoid those situations. I mean, it's part of what we do. It's part of what Lindsay's done her whole wonderful career. So, but you do need editors who are sensitive to it, and I think they are more so now than ever.
Yeah, because I think a photographer like myself or a journalist is just going to keep pushing because we don't want to be taken out of the game. We don't want to be considered, oh, this person is suffering from, PTSD, and let's just take them off assignment for a few years. Well, so most people are not going to admit when they're feeling something, so I think it has to be there has to be a way to kind of move forward in a constructive way for everyone.
Thank you. We have a question from Steve Holtzman for you, Lindsay, that says, what sort of qualities does one cultivate to grow from being a good photographer to become a great photojournalist?
I think maybe being proactive, continuing to always do research, understanding, having a good sense of the stories that you want to tell and really doing them on a profound level, not just sort of skimming the surface. I think the difference between a good and a great photographer is someone who actually sort of fully sort of embeds themselves in a story, and really kind of puts the time in and, really gets up at 5 a.m. and does work with light rather than just kind of, tool around when it's convenient. I think it's important to just, really get to the heart of whatever it is you're covering.
Have you had a particularly, standout, meaningful, impactful performance, or photographic experience, Lindsay? Stephanie Wallace is asking that. What has been something that has really left a photography experience that's really left a mark on you?
I mean, everything has. I think it's I've been doing this over 21 years, and war for 2 decades. And I think every single story contributes to who I am now, for different reasons. I think spending 2 months living on the side of a mountain with the 173rd in the Korengal Valley, I think covering, women in Darfur or the war in Darfur and women in Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, all of my work collectively feeds into just learning how to be a better journalist, learning how to continue to be sensitive, learning how to make sure that I do this with dignity and that people are not my subjects, they're actually people, and so I think all of this sort of there's not one experience really.
Is there an experience you haven't had, a place that you would like to go for a shoot and you have not yet been?
I mean, I've always wanted to go to Iceland, but it's so peaceful, so I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, coming out of a global pandemic, a peaceful place sounds like a good place to go to me. I'm gonna use my power to ask my own question. I was really struck by what you said about not being able to give away your Afghanistan photographs until 9/11 happened. I know David touched on that. Are there issues, things that you'd really like to see change in American journalism when it comes to photojournalism? Are there things that we really have to work on in your mind?
I think we need to groom and support more women, at least at war. I think there are a lot of national photographers, women doing amazing work domestically. I just don't see that many overseas. I think obviously with COVID, no one's really been traveling, but I think the one good thing about COVID is that local photographers around the world have been given a chance to really shoot for big publications, and that's great. We've seen some new emerging work. But I also think, it comes from also the editors assigning more women and trusting more women and women having confidence in themselves to sort of get out there more. And there is, of course, the issue of a lot of women, not all, because not all women want children, but many women do have to make that decision in their 30s, do they want a family? And that ultimately works against all of us because in my experience, even someone at my level who's been doing this so long, who's really very fortunately has not really struggled for work, I felt I was really penalized when I became a mother, that I had to kind of change my direction, and just because I wasn't available at the drop of a hat. It's very hard to compete with 20-year-olds who, like I was, who are willing to do anything and stay away for as long as they want. So I think it's you know, it's a tough profession. I've never had a paid vacation. I've never had a staff job. I've never, you know, I've hustled since I started, and I'm 47.
Well, I have two last questions that I'd like to pose to both of you. So first off, and I'll lead off with you, Lindsay, here. Looking back on your time at UW-Madison, is there any advice that you would give to your younger self?
I don't know. Maybe don't fall in love so much.
Well, it sounds like you've fallen in love with some wonderful places overseas, like Afghanistan.
Well, as my mother always said, I saved the best for last.
My mom had the same line. Also, something like boys are like buses. Another one will be along any minute. David, how about you? Any advice?
Well, I saved the best for first. Fortunately, I got married when I was a sophomore in college.
Oh my God.
And we're still married 51 years later.
That's insane.
That's
wow.
amazing.
But you know, my advice, it's a loaded question for me. My advice would be go to class, you moron.
Oh, I loved going to class. I was totally nerdy at math.
I was in the Rathskeller playing chess.
Yeah. No, not me. I was always in class. But having
amazing.
fun. Yeah.
You know, Anthony, one of the best conversations I ever had with Anthony was about his self-reflection when it came to ethics, and about a reporting choice he had made that he wished he could have taken back or done differently. And so let me pose first to you, David, and then Lindsay will wrap up with you. Is there a decision that you've made in your work, maybe a story missed or a person named who shouldn't have been named, something that you would have done differently if you had the time back?
When I was a young reporter at the Washington Post, I wrote a story that was totally accurate and just completely destroyed a human being who was, it was a fair story. I wasn't thinking about how he'd react to it. And he called me up and he said, David, I'm at my sink and I'm about to slit my wrist. And I had to stay on the phone with him for a couple of hours and talk him out of it. So I don't know. I mean, that's the closest I've come to anything of that sort, where he was a public figure, a minor one, very minor one. But I wasn't thinking about what this would do to his life. Now, generally speaking, when dealing with public figures, that should not be your question. But that was the one time that it made me think about that. And I, you know, but I'm a very sensitive reporter. I don't usually go around, you know, just taking advantage of people. And my whole policy has always been be straight up with them from the beginning. Tell them exactly what you're doing. You're going to search for the truth. You'll let them know what's going on. You're not playing any games. You're not being manipulative. And usually that works all for the better. So that's the way I've always approached it.
Thank you. And to you, Lindsay?
I would say it was during the Iraq War. It was more of, you know, I did my first military embeds in the Iraq War, and I think I really was kind of winging it. And I wish that I had sort of the tools, not only as a photographer, but as a journalist, that I have now back then. You know, I missed a lot of pictures. I was scared, you know, under fire. There was a moment I remember when we were in this village outside of Fallujah with the Marines, and we were in the back of a 7-ton truck, and we were ambushed, and we saw the insurgents mounting the ambush, and it was this huge gun battle, and they called in airstrikes, and I missed so much of that battle because I was so I was basically taking cover for half of it. And I so frustrated. You know, I still think about some moments like there was a car that pulled up behind the car as we were extracting, as we were leaving the battle. And the Marines just opened fire on this car. And I saw it and I didn't shoot it. And it's like those images still, you know, and I don't know if it was because I thought the Marines would be pissed that I was covering, or if I just missed it because I was like, you know, there's so much that goes on in those moments, and you're trying to stay alive and your adrenaline's going and you're like, you know, and so those, I really regret like some of those early, like Iraq war moments that I just missed.
Wow, oh, man, this has been just such a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much to both of you, Lindsay and David. And Lindsay, please go back and get just a few hours of sleep. Have a nice, relaxing evening. And you know, every time I had an email exchange with Anthony, I would sign it the same way, which was, as always, stay safe. So please do stay safe. Stay safe in the work that you do. And thank you for being with us, both of you.
And congratulations again to all the winners.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks, Lindsay. Bye-bye.
And my thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. What a phenomenal program. We were able to highlight that all-important integrity, courage, and wisdom among our nominees and winners. What tremendous strength they show in their work. Thank you to the Wisconsin Alumni Association for their help in hosting us tonight. My deepest thanks to our Center for Journalism Ethics Administrator, Christy Eastman. Believe me when I say that without her, this event never would have happened. Ellie Spadaccini and Peter Kleppen, thank you so much for the remarkable work you did on those amazing videos celebrating both our 2020 winners and our 2021 finalists and winners. You just do such a great job. To Luke Daniel Cross for creating the Shadid curriculum with us, we are deeply, deeply indebted to you. Thank you to our sponsors, the Wall Street Journal and USA Today Network, as well as to Lucas Graves and the Shadid Award Judging Committee, J. Peter Burgess, Jill Geisler, Mike Goucher, Carrie Johnson, Marty Kaiser, Jenny Price, and Chuck Stokes. These folks put in so much work to go through. You can tell from the finalist video, it is a very, very difficult decision to go through all of this, to narrow great nominations down to finalists and finalists down to a winner. My deepest thanks to the advisory board from the Center for Journalism Ethics. These are a group of people whose commitment to ethical journalism just never wavers, and their support and encouragement to us also is unflagging, especially in this pandemic year when we've needed our spirits boosted quite a bit. And then finally, I'd like to sign off thanking the people who open up their lives and often their heartbreaks to the journalists who tell their stories. I know you're probably like me, moved to the point of tears with that anecdote about the Clinique lipstick and the amount of time it takes a person to earn that amount of money in an abusive labor situation. These folks take great risk in talking to us, and you can feel their bravery throughout these 2021 finalists reporting stories. I know Anthony would join me in extending our gratitude to them. So while they are not likely here, I send my thanks out into the ether for being strong enough and brave enough to have their stories told. I hope you'll all stay connected with us in the Center for Journalism Ethics. Keep an eye out for the Shadid Award in 2022. We're going to be back in New York City, I swear it. I hope you'll join us there and or virtually. I hope you have a wonderful evening, or in Lindsay Adario's case, a restful morning. Thank you so very much, and on Wisconsin.